There's only one of us here. That's what the woman said on the screen. I had been listening to her. It was a Zoom call. There were lots of us there. Her statement confused me. There's only one of us here. So conditioned am I to an either-or way of thinking, a binary answer to any question, that I thought, I think I'm on the same side as you. So wouldn't you count me too? There's only one of us here, she said. And after a pause in which all the questions I just now shared with you had run through my head, she said, we are one. That is true. We hear people talk about karma. What you put into the world comes back to you. And there's something true about that statement, but I wonder if the truth of it is simply because everything is always in motion between you and me. And it's in that relationship that we are one. Whether seen or unseen, we are connected one with another. And so our oneness is true, whether we notice it or not. I love the image of the body for this. Blood, which courses through our veins, may be found at any moment in any part of us, cycling again back through the heart and going out again to the rest of the body again, but it's all the same. This image of our oneness grabs hold of me when I hear the news. We realize this week that our world is on a trajectory of COVID positive rates that has surpassed even the last highest number. 800,000 cases a day around the globe. It is an unfathomable number. Our brains literally cannot conceive it. And this is since we've been keeping track since January of 2020. What sense are we to make of what to do about all of this? There are some people that say it's just a virus. You can't capture it. It's in the air and you'll either get it or you won't. And you know what? They're right. They're right on the impossibility of catching air. They're right on recognizing the magnitude of this virus. They're right on recognizing that everyone's going to die sometime or another. There are others that say we need to all get vaccinated in order to stop this thing. My own body is not only my own. What I do with it actually affects others. And you know, they're right too. Seeing that I take the air we breathe into my lungs and then I put it back out for everyone to share means that my body makes a difference. I can attempt to put into the world that which is safe for you. I can give into our common environment something that you would actually be glad to receive, something which is safe for you. I am the vine, you are the branches, Jesus says. What we share, we share. Do you remember learning about vines and branches when you were in middle school? Or was it high school back then? Education has advanced in how early they teach things. I think it might have changed over the last couple of decades. I remember drawing the image of a plant and the dirt and marking the parts of the plant using colored pencils. I loved assignments that included colored pencils. How the plant draws up the water and minerals from the ground, and the plant takes sunlight in, which gives chloroplasts energy to make sugar, which is synonymous with food. I remember being really glad to learn that sugar and food were the same thing. The plant releases oxygen into the air through this process, and the plant takes in carbon dioxide. Do you remember putting the leaf under the microscope so that you could see the veins? Veins are what we have. We breathe in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. And I remember as a kid learning that we and plants were in direct relationship with one another, like a puzzle piece. We just snapped together. I couldn't live without them, and they couldn't live without me. The biodiversity of this world and how we're all interconnected is as unfathomable as the number 800,000. It just blows our minds. It's hard to conceive. We definitely can't take it around with us all the time, conscious of that reality. It would be too much. Who could even get the dishes done if we were constantly thinking about how it is that all of this works? The questions loom large. We cannot fully comprehend the significance of what we do or we don't do. If we're honest with ourselves, we like to know that there's a right way. It seems to me that white folks, having been in charge of everything for such a long time, will actually want to change the question so that we can be in charge of the answer. But it's Jesus that gives us the question. How does what you're doing demonstrate love for one another? Jesus asks. How does what you're doing demonstrate the love that you've received in me? This passage of scripture that we read for our gospel lesson today is Jesus talking at the Last Supper. He's sitting with all of his disciples, these that have broken bread with him time and again over 3 years, who have worn out their sandals together, who have been with each other day in and out. They've had lots of conversations over those 3 years. Remember, there was nothing to distract them from being with one another. No screens, no media of any sort. When you walked along the road, that's all you did. So inevitably, certainly, Jesus has had many conversations with his disciples before this one, but he knows that this is going to be the last. And so he wants to give them some things to hold on to. I am the vine, you are the branches, he tells them. It's important to remember this gospel, the Gospel of John, is written between 80 and 110 of the Common Era. Now, Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead in the 30s. So this gospel is written some 50 to 80 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. A lot has happened between then and now. Now being when the gospel was written. And the writer was likely writing from Ephesus, not writing from Asia Minor, not from Jerusalem. In the time between Jesus' resurrection and the writing of the Gospel of John, there had been a Jewish revolt in Israel against the Roman Empire in 67 of the Common Era, and the end result of all of that was the destruction of the Second Temple. The wall that's in Israel now, the Wailing Wall, is the remaining wall from the destruction of the Second Temple back in 70 of the Common Era. Ephesus, where the Gospel of John is believed to have been written, was in Asia Minor, the area where Paul traveled on his missionary journeys. And Paul's missionary journeys had already been completed by the time John's Gospel had been written. Paul's letters were written before any gospel was written down. I say all of this to highlight for you that life was not easy then. When the Gospel of John was penned, things were not rosy. There had been a ton of conflict, a ton of bloodshed. So this commandment that Jesus had given way back when was feeling even more pertinent at the time of its writing. It had been applied, I'm sure, over and over again. Jesus' commandment that we love one another. It was hard. It is hard. But keeping Jesus' commandments is how we're grafted on the vine. It's the way in which Jesus' joy is in us and our joy is complete, because that which flows through the plant comes to the branches and circles back around again. We are one. There's only one of us here. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. That's what Paul wrote in his letter to the church in Galatia. Joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. It's that which comes from the vine and the branches. The other fruits of the Spirit are love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what makes those are the little buds that turn into the fruit, that then feed and sustain and make more. I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. When I have those moments of feeling like I can do nothing, I return to my cognizance, my awareness of being grafted on the vine. I return so that I can recognize what energy I get from the vine. How is the vine feeding me? How is the vine sharing all that it has so that I grow and produce the fruit that will last? If we return to science and the law of thermodynamics, the law about the conservation of energy, we remember that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change. And so it is that the minerals and the water that come up through the vine and go to the branches create the fruit. And as the fruit gives off and makes more, then more grows. The energy is changed again and again and again. It's the fruit that grows from us. We can notice what we're grafted onto by our fruit. And currently, I see a lot of fruit that is something I don't want to see in this world. The fruit of fear, of violence, of deception, of intolerance, of impatience, short-sightedness. This is the fruit that we see in this world, and when we reflect on it, we see that we've been growing it for quite a while. This past week, in another news story, as our president gave an address and the Republican response came as well, I was challenged by the thinking that was reflected there in Senator Tim Scott's comment that America is not a racist country. My first response was, where exactly from South Carolina are you from? I would like to live there. If your experience is that America is not a racist country, then I want to be in the bubble you are in. I am in a really great bubble right here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, I have to say, but that sentence makes me think there might be a better bubble somewhere else. I know of people's commitment to not be racists on a personal and interpersonal level, but I also know that there are laws that privilege some people over others, and I'm not against laws that create some form of hierarchy, except to the extent that they dehumanize others. And that's where it really grates. That's what I've been seeing more and more of over this last year. I know of a teacher who teaches in an underprivileged area, mostly middle and lower income students. And he told me of one of his kids who was in a rented apartment and informed him that he would be moving, going to live with family somewhere else because the landlord was evicting them. Now, I know there are laws that make it possible to evict tenants that don't pay. I understand how that works. And I also thought that we had tried to make some adjustments to that so that a young person wouldn't be uprooted 3/4 of the way through the school year and plopped down in the middle of another school system. I honestly wonder, will that kid get connected? How? In this mess that we're in, the reality that we're in, how does a kid get connected in a new school district? I have heard educators say that they are literally afraid they're going to lose kids. Not that they're going to lose a year of math or a year of science, but literally lose them. That kids will become disjointed from community and fall out and into other ways of relationship. That is a big cost for us as a society. I don't fault anyone for following the rules. I'm just simply here to say, what do we do when the laws are against our humanness? Heather McGhee gives a TED Talk entitled "Racism Has a Cost for Everyone." She's a policy wonk by her own admission. That's her job, to look at data and statistics and to understand what affects things. And so she found herself surprised at the ways that various structures will hurt us all. She cited one specific event as a perfect illustration for what she was trying to share. Back in Montgomery, Alabama, back in the 50s, she reminded us that in the 30s and 40s, there was a lot of national spending on public goods for everyone's benefit. And in Montgomery, Alabama, there was the Oak Park pool. It was, again, as you can imagine, a real treat in the heat of the humid summer of Alabama. And people would spend their day there. The way she describes it, splashing and sunning and resting in the shade. This public good was funded by public money, but in that time, it was for whites only. And so when the federal government handed down a ruling that everything should be desegregated that was funded by public dollars, the town declared on January 1st, 1959, that they were going to fill in Oak Park Pool. It never opened again. In Montgomery, Alabama, for a decade, they closed down their parks department. That is painful. Where does the energy go when it's no longer built on relating to one another, but keeping one another out? Returning to the law of thermodynamics, the energy cannot be added or changed, but only added or subtracted, but only changed. It makes me wonder, where did all that goodwill go? That energy of creation, of enjoyment of creation, of being in relationship with one another, where did that energy go? I can admit that we can call it what you will. If you don't want to call it racism, then don't call it that. I think it's nice to have a shared definition of terms, but I'm not here to wordsmith anything. I'm not talking about a theory. I'm talking about people's lives. Talking about how to make lives better in relationship with one another. I know that we're all going to die sometime or another, but what about now? What can motivate us to change the energy? Stories like the Oak Park pool motivate me. The effort of power hoarding puts me in a place of defensiveness, and I don't want to be in a place of defensiveness. Power hoarding makes me have to look at the other as a threat or an enemy, and I literally don't have time for that. Literally don't have time for that. And so it is that when I can find myself doing nothing, I return to the vine, remember how I'm grafted on in baptism, and hear the words of Scripture again. The letters of John, the one letter that we read from today, it's the longest one. You should see 2 and 3. They're like a paragraph. But these letters followed John's gospel and are believed to be written by someone in the Johannine community, not by the same gospel writer. They're believed to have been written following a schism which happened within their own community. And so we hear verses 16 through 21 in the passage that we read today. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness on the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in the world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. My friends, we are all somewhere between bad and good at this. On the spectrum, none of us has reached perfection. And so we have no place to judge the other, none. But we can ask the question, how does what we're doing reflect our love for brothers and sisters? What are we going to do now? And when we feel ourselves paralyzed, we must take a moment to remember the vine on which we're grafted, to return again to the good news so that we might be fed, and the fruit that comes forth from our lives can be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness and self-control. We cannot produce this fruit. Jesus reminds us, apart from me, you can do nothing. And then I'm like, oh, is that why this is so hard? Our faith informs our actions. That is why I'm inviting you to that hour-long Zoom call to look at working on understanding and addressing racism. Not because I have the answer, nor because you do, but because brothers and sisters are hurting. And some of them look like us. It's why we're having Peacemakers on May 15th, so that we can remember the diversity of God's creation, can take a moment in the peaceful beauty of New England to receive the goodness that we hear from our brothers and sisters in this world. Because we don't want to be liars. How do we love our brothers and sisters? That's the question. Well, Jesus reminds us that it requires us to lay down our lives of comfort, our lives that tell us this bubble is great. Because it is that bubble living which actually costs others their lives. We can't do this on our own, my brothers and sisters, but that's okay to realize because we are the branches on the vine. Through Jesus, we have been grafted on the vine. It happened in our baptism, and it is through the vine that we receive all that we need to sustain us. So when we find ourselves frozen, unable to do anything, we are called back into the scriptures, back into the story of our faith, just as we read in the book of Acts where the eunuch says to Philip, "How can I understand this? I don't have anyone to tell me about it." And so it is that Philip recounts the whole salvation story. I want to remind you of this book. If you haven't read the Bible in its entirety, then just get this little version. Because when you come to know the whole salvation story, you realize you have what you need to love one another. In Jesus, we are always called to grow in our love for one another, but we must know the risen Lord. And I know that when we do that, people will begin to see the good news. They will begin to see the fruit of the Spirit. They'll see our love, our joy, our peace, our patience, our kindness, our goodness, our faithfulness, our gentleness, our self-control. And that fruit will be sweet to their taste. And they will realize that in receiving it, they too can be a part of the vine and receive all the goodness that God has for us in the risen Lord. In the spirit of Easter, let us remember our call and response. Alleluia, Christ is risen.